Well, folks, this race continues to be unbelievably tight. We have some new state-level polling. We'll get to that momentarily. First, in just 9 days, our first ever theatrical release, Am I Racist?, hits theaters nationwide. Coming up later in the show, I've got an exclusive sneak peek from our friend Matt Walsh. You're not going to want to miss it. Right now, head on over to miracist.com for tickets and showtimes near you. Alrighty, so if you listen to the legacy media, you would believe that Kamala Harris is running away with the race. In fact, Drudge Report, which has essentially become the repository of all left-wing media narrative, has a series of headlines at the top of the site saying, "Final sprint begins. Focus on 7 states. Harris plus 4. Harris plus 4. There's only one problem with Harris plus 4. Trump maintains his hold on vital swing states in the exact same INI TIPP poll that is now being pushed by Matt Drudge. And the same thing holds true nationally. If you look at the Real Clear Politics polling average, what you find is that Kamala Harris has about a 2-point lead nationally. However, Donald Trump still maintains a lead in Arizona. He is in margin of error in Nevada. He's down about a point in Wisconsin. He's down supposedly a point in Michigan. And he's dead even in Pennsylvania. And he's leading in North Carolina and Georgia by just a little bit. Every single one of those states is within the margin of error, according to the Real Clear Politics polling average. More than that, over the course of the last couple of days, there have been some polls that are not particularly good for Kamala Harris. In fact, there's a brand new Michigan poll out by Glenn Gariff Group for WDIV Detroit News that shows Trump up 1. It also shows RFK Jr. still receiving 5% in that poll. Well, RFK Jr. dropped out and he threw his support to Trump. So presumably that lead is going to be bigger for Trump. Furthermore, there's some brand new polling in Pennsylvania that demonstrates that Donald Trump is probably up in Pennsylvania as well, which is why the Kamala Harris campaign is dumping a ton of money into Pennsylvania right now. In fact, of the last 5 polls in Pennsylvania, Trump is ahead in 3. He is tied in 1. Only Bloomberg Morning Consult, which is kind of an outlier statistically speaking, only they have Kamala Harris ahead. This is the reason why if you go to Nate Silver's prediction of how the race is going, he believes that even though Kamala Harris is ahead nationally, Donald Trump has a better shot of winning the election today than he did, say, a week or 2 weeks ago. He is not the only one, by the way. Steve Kornacki over at MSNBC. He says this notion that Kamala Harris is a lock, I'm not sure where you're getting that.
Harris with a 3-point advantage nationally over Donald Trump. Now, if you're a Democrat, the good news, besides the fact that you're ahead, is that's an improvement for Democrats from where things were before Harris became the candidate. Joe Biden almost all year was trailing Donald Trump, so that's changed Harris ahead by a few points there. Now, if you're a Republican, what you can take solace from here is this is not unfamiliar territory for Donald Trump.
Okay, bottom line here is that the notion that Donald Trump is running super far behind is not true, despite literally a month, now almost a month and a half, of glowing media coverage of Kamala Harris, despite the attempts of legacy media to pour it on. I mean, they are pouring on the glitter. They're pouring on the joy. They're saying that she ran the best DNC in modern American history. She got 0 bounce out of the DNC. I said this immediately after the DNC. There are people who said that I was wrong. Those people were wrong. There was no bounce from the DNC. That is not me. That is Nate Silver. Quote, Harris is, in fact, polling a bit better now than before the DNC, but only a little bit better. The model's baseline expectation was a bounce of more like 2 points. By the model's logic, she's gone from a lead of 2.3 points to a convention bounce-adjusted lead of 1.5 points. One of the things that Nate Silver's model tries to take into account is whether particular people are underperforming historic averages with regard to a convention. So if you expected her to get, say, a 4-point bounce from the convention, and instead she got like a 2.5-point bounce, she's underperforming based on that, and that means that her popularity is already baked into the cake at this point. Furthermore, she has, because of the halo effect, become more popular on the issues, even though she is really bad on the issues. So because of all the glowing media coverage of Kamala Harris as a human, because of all the focus on Kamala Harris and her dancing and her joy and her cooking and she makes brisket and all this other crap, because of all the focus on that sort of stuff, there's been a bit of a halo effect that has attached to policies that are exactly the same as Joe Biden. So, for example, brand new polling from USA Today Suffolk shows that on the economy, Donald Trump is favored over Kamala Harris by just 6 percentage points, 51 to 45. He had a 14-point advantage on Joe Biden in June. On immigration, Trump is only up 3 points as opposed to the 13 he was up over Joe Biden. On national security, on dealing with China, Trump was preferred over Harris by 4, but that is down from 10 points in terms of the margin over Joe Biden. Now, There are two ways to possibly explain that. One is that people were so just unsatisfied with Joe Biden as a human being that they were allowing that to color their perceptions of his policy. The other thing that could be happening here is that it turns out Joe Biden's policies are garbage, that they're really, really bad, and that Kamala Harris has escaped so far any blame for his policies because she's not Joe Biden. But that is the job of the Trump campaign to tie Kamala Harris to those policies. It is that latter supposition that I think is true. I think that Kamala Harris on policy is a disaster show. I think that Kamala Harris is a dumpster fire on policy, and that when Americans realize that she is just a fresh coat of paint on the same bad old policies they didn't like from Joe Biden, they're going to be deeply unhappy. They're going to be deeply unhappy, just as deeply unhappy as they were with Joe Biden. Maybe even more so because they will be disappointed that Kamala Harris is more of the same. Well, it's very weird to be unhappy with Joe Biden's policies, but somehow happy with Kamala Harris. That doesn't make any sense. You know what else doesn't make any sense? Sticking with Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. You see, they want you to believe that you need unlimited data so they can overcharge you. But here's the fact. Most of you are buying way more data than you will ever need or use. With Pure Talk, my cell phone company, you can actually choose how much data you want and you can save. Listen to this. For just $35 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, 15 gigs of data, plus mobile hotspot on America's most dependable 5G network. Do you know what you can do with that much data? You can browse the internet for 500 hours. You can stream 3,000 songs. You can watch 30 hours of video. That's if you're not on Wi-Fi. Here's the best part. When you switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk on a qualifying plan, you will get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider, which is access to the full library of DW Plus movies, series, documentaries, including Lady Ballers, What is a Woman, Mr. Bertram, Run, Hide, Fight, plus uncensored ad-free daily shows, 1 year free of our kids platform Bentkey, and your very own free Leftist Tears Tumblr. The only way you can get the special offer is by going to puretalk.com/Shapiro or call and mention my name. So stop overpaying for your cell phone plan. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro today. Switch to a qualifying plan and get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. Kamala Harris is desperately attempting to evade responsibility for her tenure as Vice President of the United States. Here, for example, is an ad. This is from the Kamala Harris campaign talking about how she's going to take on inflation. Does anyone believe this? She presided. She was the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, a massive piece of boondoggle spending that poured money into an already overheated economy. She is part of the administration. She's the last person in the room, according to her, in the decision-making when it comes to things like economic policy. And yet here she is now cutting ads suggesting that Donald Trump is going to ramp up inflation and she's going to bring it down. This is a dog that just won't hunt.
We all know costs are too high, but while corporations are gouging families, Trump is focused on giving them tax cuts.
Ridiculous.
But Kamala Harris is focused on you.
Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
She'll make groceries more affordable by cracking down on price gouging. And she'll cut housing costs by taking on corporate speculators. Middle-class families build America. We need a leader who has their back.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
And the easy response to that is, you don't have their back. You destroyed middle-class wages. You destroyed the ability of human beings in this country to buy groceries. Groceries are way more expensive than they were when Kamala Harris took power. And Americans are going to realize that. They're going to see through that. This is something that Donald Trump obviously is going to have to bring up at the debate. At the debate, Kamala Harris is going to say that she's going to bring down prices by targeting price gouging. And he's going to have to say, what price gouging are you talking about? Is your suggestion that CVS and Ralph's and Target and Publix have all radically increased their pricing, not based on supply and demand and based on the inflation of the currency by you, but because they just got greedy somehow? Stop trying to evade the blame for your own crap economy. Meanwhile, she is now apparently going to trot out a series of new business policies. Why? Because she has to do something to spin away from Joe Biden's business policies. His business policies are trash. She has to find a way of evading those business policies. So according to the Washington Post, Harris will propose a $50,000 tax benefit for new small businesses, according to a campaign official, as the Democratic presidential nominee aims to detail her economic policy vision ahead of next week's debate with former President Donald Trump. Okay, so let's just get this straight. If she increases the corporate tax rate to 28% federally, which is what she is seeking to do, if she seeks a 25% unrealized capital gains tax, then it's not going to matter how often she throws out a $50,000 stipend. Paid for by what, by the way? You want to increase inflation? This is a great way to do it. She's literally, all of her plans are, what if I radically increase taxes and also radically increase spending? That's all. That's all her plans are. Radical increases to taxes, radical increase to spending. That's it. And if you believe that that is a recipe for economic health, then I have the last 3.5 years to sell you. And by the way, that's Joe Biden being stymied by the Republican House. Imagine if, God forbid, Kamala Harris gains control of the House and the Senate. Then this is the least of your concerns. The new tax plan, part of a broader effort to encourage entrepreneurship, would massively expand an existing $5,000 deduction for startup firms, said the official, who shared the plan with reporters on the condition of anonymity because it had not yet been made public. Again, this is just another trial balloon that the Harris campaign is throwing out there. Her last trial balloon she floated out there was basically price controls. Harris is eyeing the measure as a way to draw a contrast on economic policy with Trump, who has called for cutting the tax rate paid by corporations and maintaining lower tax rates for high-income individuals, along with other policies aimed at helping lower and middle-class taxpayers. Now remember, Trump's tax cuts lowered taxes for virtually all Americans. If Kamala Harris had her way, that tax cut would expire and taxes would go up on virtually all Americans. Advisors to Harris's campaign are also discussing plans to bolster the safety net. There's not enough in the safety net. Did you know that? Did you know that the United States, one of the most redistributionist countries in the history of the world, doesn't have enough of a safety net? Were you aware of that? No, you probably weren't aware of it because it's a lie. And the fact of the matter is that the top taxpayers in the United States pay literally all net taxes in the country. All. Because it turns out a huge percentage of people who pay taxes in this country also receive offsetting government benefits that outweigh what they are paying in taxes. So she wants childcare or paid leave expansions. Again, these are all plans that she's going to throw out there because she can't just run on her record. If she ran on her record, she would lose. And by the way, the markets are going to take all of this into account. They really, really will. Now, Tim Walz, for example, he's out there campaigning on the basis that he's not just in the pocket of the unions, he is the unions. This is literally what he said while campaigning on Labor Day. Now, let's just be clear. Private sector labor unions in the United States account for about 7% of the workforce. They used to account for 30% of the workforce. Now it's 7%. Why? Because it turns out that wages on average go up more when the business community grows. And this notion that strong labor unions are what brought about economic prosperity in the United States belies pretty much all the facts. The reality is that what brings about strong growth in the United States is the growth of innovation and business and free markets. There are lots of countries with really strong labor unions, including, for example, Great Britain. They have stagnating economies. Tons of countries in Europe have really, really strong labor unions. In fact, there are labor unions that are actually significantly more useful if you look to Northern Europe, where those labor unions actually provide social security benefits, for example, to the people who work for them, as opposed to many of the private sector unions who instead are negotiating with their employers or negotiating with the state. In any case, Tim Walz wants to radically increase the cost of labor in this country. Let's see how that works in terms of the inflationary cycle that Kamala Harris is supposedly attempting to stop.
I can remember, and this was one, Republicans came up to me in one of my campaigns, and they said, Tim is in the pocket of organized labor. I said, that's a damn lie. I am the pocket. I am the pocket.
Hey, first of all, I don't even understand what that means. How can you be the pocket? What does that even mean? Well, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. It doesn't make any sense because, that made no sense. But you know what else makes no sense? Giving all of your data to big tech. Now, a few decades ago, private citizens used to be mostly private, and then came the internet. Think about everything. You've browsed, searched for, watched, tweeted. Now imagine all that data being collected by data brokers into a permanent public record. Having your private life exposed for others to see was once something only celeb was worried about, but in an era where everybody is online, everybody is now a public figure. To keep my data private when I go online, I turn to ExpressVPN. So here's the deal. Your device's IP address is like a digital fingerprint. With ExpressVPN, your IP address is hidden. That makes it way more difficult for data brokers to monitor, track, and monetize your private online activity. It works on all your devices too. Phone, laptop, tablet, you name it, ExpressVPN's got you covered. ExpressVPN doesn't just hide your IP, it encrypts 100% of your network traffic to keep your data safe from hackers when you're on public Wi-Fi. One tap of the ExpressVPN button and boom, I am now protected. It is that easy. Protect your data with #1 rated VPN provider today by visiting expressvpn.com/Ben. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. Get 3 extra months for free with my exclusive link. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. But we don't expect any sort of actual cohesive thought from Tim Walz, a corgi of a human being, enthusiasm matched only by his stupidity. Meanwhile, more fears of economic stagnation under the Biden-Harris administration. The stock market tumbled more than 600 points as manufacturing PMI data fueled slowdown fears, according to the Wall Street Journal. Investors are back to viewing weak economic data as bad news for stocks. On Tuesday, stocks sank and long-dated treasuries rose as fresh data suggested an ongoing gloom in the manufacturing sector. The Institute for Supply Management's Purchasing Managers Index of Manufacturing Activity rose to 47.2 in August from 46.8 in July. That was a smaller rise than expected and indicated a contraction in activity, albeit at a gentler pace. Now again, overall, the stock market has done well. That's what happens in an inflationary cycle very often because people have no place to put the money other than in stocks. However, real growth in wealth is because of innovation. Innovation can only happen with a predictable regime of property rights and free markets, not when somebody could come along at any moment and put their hand into your pocket and steal all of your money. This is the reason why James Carville is explicitly saying that Kamala Harris needs to run away from her own record in the debates. He says that her best strategy to defeat Trump involves a few different components. Component number one, he says, is help Trump hurt himself in the debate. He says, by and large, Ms. Harris is diverging from normal fear-provoking way of going about Mr. Trump. Instead of building him up as a threat to America, she's getting voters chuckling and nodding by saying of the former president and his crew, they're out of their minds. People smile when they think a politician has her opponent's number, and they like she's calling him weird and unserious and painting a broader picture of Mr. Trump as a tired old tapestry. We already have some indication her team is prepping her to do just that. In the September 10th debate, Ms. Harris must enable exactly what his campaign is scared to death of, letting Trump be Trump. She should let him talk over her. Not just let him, but goad him into spouting insane conspiracy theories about the previous election, right? That, of course, is one of the reasons why she wants the open mic, as we've discussed. But it's number two here that Carville talks about that is indicative of just how bad the Biden-Harris administration has been. Quote, break from President Biden on policy. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself, but wait, I thought this is the most accomplished, achievement-oriented administration of our lifetime. I was told that by Kamala Harris. I was told that Joe Biden is the most consequential president of our lifetime, a living God, a George Washington-like human being whose valor is matched only by his self-sacrifice. That's what I was told by Kamala Harris. And yet here's James Carville telling me she has to run directly away from Joe Biden's policies, screaming in order to avoid complicity in those policies. Quote, Mr. Biden has been one of the most consequential presidents in U.S. history. Blah, 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 blah. But Mr. Biden's not in the race. To be the certified fresh candidate, Ms. Harris must clearly and decisively break from Mr. Biden on a set of policy priorities she believes would define her presidency. It's not about that. She has to not just appear as a fresh face. She has to appear as though she is utterly disconnected from this administration. This administration is unpopular. She needs to not be part of it. It's why she wants to somehow magically say that she was the last person in the room on every major decision. And also, she literally has never met Joe Biden and has nothing to do with him. Here's an idea, says James Carville. Do it one day in a swing state, just a hair after the debate. Hold a rally. Put out a broad list of new way forward policies that detail why she is breaking from the sitting president on the given issues and what change would deliver to the American people. After that rally, do a news conference on it so media organizations stop cranking their clamshells about a lack of access. Don't run from your differences with the president. Embrace them respectfully and honestly. Now, the reality is that she can't really do that because then Joe Biden would immediately slap her. And it might be that everyone will point out how cynical it is and how she's lying. And then he says, you also have to run away from yourself. She is such a weak candidate. She's such a weak candidate. So remember, there are three things Carville is recommending. One, target Trump. All right, fine. Two, run away from Joe Biden's policies, which is to say her policies. She is the vice president. And finally, she has to display a clear growth mindset from the 2020 Democratic primaries. At the same time, she must break from Mr. Biden on some policy measures. She has one lingering liability she will not be able to outrun: the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination campaign, in which she and a gaggle of candidates favored more exotic positions within the Democratic Party. As last week's CNN interview with Ms. Harris showed, this will be a consistent plotline deployed at her throughout the campaign. It's vital she give the same answer every time to these attacks. The retort can be simple. I learned from my time governing in the White House. These are my positions. Take it or leave it. Notice the lie he's promoting. So, according to him, she should say simultaneously the following two things. I disagree with everything Joe Biden is doing. Also, I learned so much from Joe Biden that I disagree with everything I said back in 2020. So what in the hell would she agree with at that point? She's an empty suit. We all know she's an empty suit. And the thing that nobody is willing to acknowledge is just how much of an empty suit she is. It is perfectly clear that she's an empty suit. So, hilariously, Peter Doocy was in the White House press room yesterday, and he asked Karine Jean-Pierre about a very bizarre sort of code switch that Kamala Harris did the other day when she traveled from Detroit to Pittsburgh. When she was in Detroit, suddenly she was dropping a Southern accent, right? The G's went away. And then she goes to Pittsburgh and she speaks as though she is a business major at University of Pennsylvania and doing a PowerPoint presentation. So Peter Doocy asked about this. Listen to Karine Jean-Pierre try to run headlong from this question.
Since when does the vice president have what sounds like a Southern accent?
Better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. And you all helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well,
I mean, this is...
she was talking about unions in Detroit using one tone of voice.
Is this something that
same
you think...
line.
Okay, Peter.
That she used the same line in Pittsburgh, and it sounded like she at least had some kind of a southern drawl.
I mean, do you hear the question that you're... I mean, do you think Americans seriously think that this is an important question? They care... You know what they care about? They care about the economy. They care about lowering costs.
I thought they cared about joy.
Healthcare. That's what Americans care about.
So
that's what they want to hear.
This is something...
They care about, your colleague just asked me about, basically we talked about, went back and forth about democracy and freedom. That's what they care about. I'm not even going to entertain some question about the president. It's just, hearing it sounds so ridiculous.
Well, but hearing it is...
The question, I'm talking about the questions is just insane.
Is that how she talks in meetings here?
I'm just, Peter, we're moving on.
We're moving on. Of course they're not going to answer that question because she is pandering. That's what she does. She panders. One of the most amazing things about this administration is that at the top of the administration, you have an almost literal dead person. Joe Biden went to the beach for 2 weeks. He was sitting on the beach when an American citizen in Israel, in the Gaza Strip, being held by Hamas, got shot in the back of the head. He was sitting on a beach. He came back. He blathered into a microphone. And then he went and campaign rallied with Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. He sounded absolutely incoherent. He sounded as though he was completely addled. And then he went out and he told the press he can't go out in crowds anymore. This is the sitting president of the United States. Here was Joe Biden yesterday.
President, how was it to be back on the campaign trail today?
It was good.
That's good. How do you feel about Pennsylvania?
Except I'm not able to go out in the crowds anymore. The Secret Service doesn't let me.
No, why not?
Well, because it says too dangerous. No one gets to go out.
He's not allowed to go out in the crowds anymore. That one, who's not there, is the president. And his backup, who could theoretically invoke the 25th Amendment and become president herself, is also not there because she's a complete empty suit. And everybody knows it. Everyone knows this. Kamala's campaign has nothing to do with policy. If it did, then her numbers would be much worse because her policies are terrible, including, of course, her Israel policy. All of Israel right now is mourning the loss of the 6 hostages abducted during the October 7th attacks. Israel continues to be on high alert for a possible major assault by Iran due to security situations. Many major airlines have canceled or suspended flights into Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv. In the event of an attack, Israelis across the country could be forced to spend days or weeks in bomb shelters. While these shelters keep Israelis safe, they need to be equipped with basic essentials for survival. The Fellowship has launched a project to immediately equip bomb shelters with emergency food boxes for Israelis who have to remain there in case of an Iranian attack. 10,000 of these food boxes have been delivered. They're preparing to deliver thousands more. In northern Israel, the Fellowship has delivered firefighting equipment, protective equipment for hospitals, 2 bulletproof vehicles, and much more to enhance security and protect both citizens and first responders. They're on the ground. They're working around the clock to fill immediate needs. We are looking for 300 more listeners to join me by donating $100 to meet these urgent security needs. Thanks to a generous IFCJ supporter, your gift will be matched, doubling your impact in the Holy Land. I'm grateful for our loyal listeners. We are super close to hitting our goal. We need all the support we can get. We have a few days left because the match campaign ends September 8th. To give to IFCJ, visit benforthefellowship.org. That's benforthefellowship.org. God bless and thank you. It's not even a secret. It's wide out in the open. I understand that Democrats are running an empty suit against Donald Trump and they think that'll win. Maybe they're right. But can we stop pretending for a shred of a solitary second this has anything to do with her positions? It clearly does not. She won't even define her own positions. It is the thing she is least likely to do. All of which suggests that we are about to enter a period of pretty significant narrative repression. And we have hit the high watermark for Kamala Harris. Now, barring some sort of major catastrophe for Donald Trump on the stage at the debate next week, we have hit the high watermark for Kamala Harris. The joy is running out. The thrill, as they say, is gone. She feels as though she is in the mire. She feels as though she is stagnating because she is. There's been no movement in the polls in her favor. The state polls are not moving in her favor. She's basically flatlined at this point. Now, she's flatlined even with Trump, so it's not like she's losing by 1,000 points the way that Joe Biden was near the end. But the momentum is no longer clearly with her. We have now settled into a new stasis. And it's unclear how long that stasis is going to last because, after all, most Americans don't even know Kamala Harris. They know nothing about her. How long can Kamala Harris go without the American people becoming acquainted with her? Which suggests, again, that we are about to be subjected to a great censorship regime in the United States. I say this because that's precisely what happened in 2020. In 2020, there was a full-scale, media-level lockdown on the Hunter Biden story the month before the election in an attempt to secure election for Joe Biden. Well, now we're at the point where there's no information about Kamala Harris, which requires a much bigger lockdown if you want to get Kamala Harris through unscathed, which is why I think you are now seeing an elevated level of attack on particularly Elon Musk. So the left has decided now, at least parts of the left have decided, it is absolutely necessary that Elon Musk's ex be punished. Why? Because it turns out that many of the other social media tech bros, they've done what they can in favor of Democrats in order to prevent the dissemination of material that Kamala Harris might not like too much. But X is pretty freewheeling. X is pretty open for all the good and all the bad. And they're mostly angry that Elon Musk has declared that he himself supports President Trump. None of the other social media bros have. All of them are pretty well-known Democratic voters, or they've tried to stay out of it completely. But Musk himself has supported Trump. He's interviewed Trump and all the rest on X. Presumably, this is why you're seeing the left cheer along as dictatorial regimes attempt to shut down X. So Brazil, you old enough to remember when Jair Bolsonaro, the conservative right-wing leader of Brazil, narrowly lost an election in sort of disputed circumstances, and then he was immediately arrested and barred from running in the future. And Lula da Silva, who was treated by the media of the United States as a great liberator, it turns out that he was actually quite dictatorial, and he and the Brazilian judiciary basically rewrote the Constitution in tyrannical ways. Well, now Brazil is outlawing X. According to the Wall Street Journal, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said his country should serve as an example for the rest of the world on how to deal with Elon Musk after the Supreme Court voted to uphold a ban on X. Brazil's leftist leader told local media late on Monday, quote, "The world is not obliged to put up with Musk's far-right ideology just because he is rich." Now, you might think that the world should be obliged to hear a lot of points of view that they don't like. And we do it pretty much all the time here in the United States. But apparently not. Brazil shut down X over the weekend after Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes outlawed the social media platform entirely for failing to suspend accounts he asserted contained hate speech and misinformation, as well as complying with other legal requirements. A 5-member panel of justices voted unanimously in favor of the ban on Monday after de Moraes called on the court to review his decision. He and the court have been facing accusations of overstepping their mandate both here and in Brazil and far beyond. The ban on X is one of the most audacious moves made by the judiciary. Even before taking on Elon Musk, de Moraes had earned a reputation as a lightning rod in Brazil's battles over free speech. It slapped fines and bans on social media companies over recent years. He also has led criminal investigations into Jair Bolsonaro. So remember, dictatorship of the left is apparently just hunky-dory with many people on the American left, so long as it targets their political opponents. As Bill Ackman, the U.S. hedge fund billionaire, said, shutting down X in Brazil, quote, puts Brazil on a rapid path to becoming an uninvestable market. By the way, it's not just that they went after X. De Moraes also froze the bank accounts of Starlink, which is Musk's satellite internet operation, to ensure the social network would pay its tyrannical fines. Arthur Lira, the powerful leader of Brazil's lower house of Congress, said the court should never have taken action against Starlink simply because the company shares the same owner as X. He said the legal battle surrounding X should never have been transferred to Starlink. Now, what sort of consequences does this have for the United States? Obviously, we have seen the government of France now cracking down on the creator of Telegram, because Telegram is supposedly being used for dissemination of drugs and terrorism. Also, Telegram is just an encrypted messaging service. That's all it is. It's a phone line. Well, nothing is safe in this particular political environment, and that includes you. If you got back taxes, unfiled returns, great shot the IRS is going to come after you, and handling this alone can be a huge mistake and cost you thousands of dollars. In these challenging times, your best offense is Tax Network USA. With over 14 years of experience, the experts at Tax Network USA have saved clients millions in back taxes. Regardless of the size of your tax issue, their expertise will work to your advantage. Tax Network USA offers 3 key services: protection, compliance, and settlement. Upon signing up, Tax Network USA will immediately contact the IRS to secure a protection order, ensuring that aggressive collection activities like garnishments, levies, or property seizures are halted. If you haven't filed in a while, if you need amended returns, or if you're just missing records, Tax Network USA's expert tax preparers will update all your filings to eliminate the risk of IRS enforcement. Then they create a settlement strategy to reduce or eliminate your tax debt. The IRS is the largest collection agency on planet Earth. Now that tax season is over, collection season has begun. Tax Network USA can even help with state tax issues. For a complimentary consultation, call today 1-800-958-1000 or visit their website at tnusa.com/Shapiro. That's 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Shapiro. Today, do not let the IRS take advantage of you. Get the help you need with Tax Network USA. Now, we are seeing X being targeted by Brazil for not shutting down quote-unquote hate speech and misinformation. Both unbelievably malleable terms that have been applied to pretty much everything that just disagrees with the left-wing social agenda. And that is being celebrated by some in the United States. For example, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who is the AG under Kamala Harris's VP candidate Tim Walz, cheered the suspension of X in Brazil. He posted on X, "Obrigado Brazil," which translates to "Thank you, Brazil." Elon Musk then replied, quote, "The Democratic Party, same one that used to defend the First Amendment, now wants to destroy the First Amendment." That, of course, is true. It is true. And you know who else used to be very much in favor of banning people from X for things they disliked? Kamala Harris, when she called for X then it was called Twitter, to ban Donald Trump and all the other social media companies to ban Donald Trump and do the bidding of the Democratic left.
He has lost his privileges and it should be taken down. And the bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and you have a different rule for Twitter. The same rule has to apply, which is that there has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
That is Kamala Harris in 2019 calling on Twitter and Facebook and everybody else to ban Donald Trump. Hey, if you don't believe that they are going to go over the mechanisms of informational distribution, I'm just going to point out that they do it all the time already. One of the big things that has happened in the news market has been the cudgeling of social media into shutting down the dissemination of the news business, a move that literally only helps the legacy media. The legacy media are already pre-established. Startup companies that are heavily invested online are the ones who pay the price. Those are largely dissenting media voices. And again, this is something that the left is quite warm toward, at least large parts of the left. Robert Reich, the former labor secretary under Bill Clinton, has an entire article at The Guardian titled "Elon Musk is out of control. Here is how to rein him in." He says, quote, "Musk owns X, formerly known as Twitter. He publicly endorsed Donald Trump last month. Before that, Musk helped form a pro-Trump super political action committee. Meanwhile, the former U.S. president has revived his presence on the X platform." So what does he say? He says, here are 6 ways to rein in Musk. Boycott Tesla. So apparently we should, put 6 feet under the most innovative car company on planet Earth and also the leader in the green revolution in favor of electric vehicles. We should just boycott that because Elon Musk disagrees with Robert Reich. Advertisers should also boycott X. Again, this is what the left wants. They want to use advertiser dollars in order to cudgel media outlets into doing their whim. Further than that, quote, "Regulators around the world should threaten Musk with arrest if he doesn't stop disseminating lies and hate on X." Global regulators may already be on the way to doing this, as evidenced by the 24 August arrest in France of Pavel Durov, who founded the online communications tool Telegram, which French authorities have found complicit in hate crimes and disinformation. Like Musk, Durov has styled himself as a free speech absolutist. In the United States, the FTC should go after Elon Musk as well. The U.S. should terminate its contracts with SpaceX, again, the most innovative space company on planet Earth. These are all recommendations from a former labor secretary for Bill Clinton. So, am I suspicious there will be an attempt to shut down informational dissemination through pressure tactics on social media before the election? Yeah, I am. So I'm very grateful that Elon Musk bought X in the first place. Because right now, if X were in other hands, you'd be getting ready for the coercive and collusive attempt to shut down speech right before another presidential election. In just 1 second, we'll get to a shocking story out of the office of the New York governor. Turns out Democrats can't stay away from Chinese spies. It's super duper duper weird. First, we're just 9 days away from our first ever theatrical release, Am I Racist? Mark your calendars for Friday, September 13th. The joke's on the left. The only way to see it is on the big screen. Theaters are selling out across the country. When they do, more screens are added. So if you've previously been to AmIRacist.com and you didn't see a theater in your city, check again now. Our friend Matt Walsh sent us a sneak peek from Am I Racist? This one is called The Moana Problem. Take a look.
My daughter's 4 years old. I am an anti-racist educator, quote unquote. She's still watching Disney movies, and she is choosing a white princess over princesses of color.
Have you talked to her about that?
All the time.
My 3-year-old daughter is her favorite princess is Moana.
Love it.
It's a good sign.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, there's a little bit of cultural appropriation here. She wants to be Moana for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we navigate that? Do I go and buy the Pacific Islander native attire for my white 3-year-old?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
But I guess what we might call the Moana problem here is what, on one hand, there's cultural appropriation. On the other hand, there's gravitating towards white characters.
Right.
So it's almost like no matter which way you go, you end up back in racism.
We think every space belongs to us because we live in a white supremacist society.
Is America an inherently racist country?
I think the word inherent is challenging there. If we say...
Fundamentally,
yes. America is racist to its bones. All of the...
So inherently.
Yeah.
They gonna say you racist. Am I Racist? In theaters September 13th. Rated PG-13. Buy tickets now.
Get your tickets, join the fun opening weekend September 13th. Go to miracist.com for tickets and showtimes right now. Meanwhile, it seems that Democrats are having a serious problem staying away from Chinese spies. First, it was Dianne Feinstein, the former senator from California. She had a very high-ranking Chinese spy in her office. And then it turns out, of course, that Eric Swalwell was having with the Chinese spy named Fang Fang. You remember that one. And now it turns out that a top aide to New York's governor was an agent for the Chinese Communist Party. According to the Department of Justice, earlier today in federal court in Brooklyn, an indictment was unsealed charging Linda Sun with violating and conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agents Registration Act, visa fraud, alien smuggling, and money laundering conspiracy. Sun is alleged to have acted on behalf of the CCP. Sun's husband and co-defendant, Chris Hu, was also charged with money laundering conspiracy, as well as conspiracy to commit bank fraud. So apparently, she was the deputy chief of staff within the New York State Executive Chamber. Both she and her husband worked to further the interests of the Chinese government and the CCP. The illicit scheme enriched the defendant's family to the tune of millions of dollars. Sun is alleged to be an undisclosed agent of the PRC and the CCP, using Chinese money and her influence within the state of New York to benefit the Chinese government. Sun and her husband then laundered millions of dollars for the foreign country and used the monetary benefits of the scheme to buy luxury vehicles and million-dollar properties in New York, which is the way a good communist works, right? I mean, the good communists, they get dashas, they get really nice stuff. Apparently, she worked on significant speeches for Kathy Hochul. She blocked representatives of the Taiwanese government from having access to high-level New York State officers. She changed high-level New York State officers' messaging regarding issues of importance to the CCP. Again, weird that a person could get away with all of that for that long. Almost as though Democrats are peculiarly warm toward the Chinese government. I mean, so strange. It would be even stranger if perhaps the sitting president of the United States' son had cleared millions of dollars from the Chinese government. That would also be really, really weird. It also is kind of weird that China, according to the Washington Post, has now extended its repression directly into the heart of San Francisco. Quote, Chinese diplomats and pro-China diaspora groups based in the United States organized demonstrations in San Francisco that harassed and silenced protesters opposed to Beijing's policies, including through violence, during Xi Jinping's visit to the city in November. Now, you'll remember, he visited the city, so did Joe Biden, and that was when the mayor of San Francisco temporarily cleaned up the city. Well, it turns out the CCP basically used that entire event as cover to go after its political enemies inside the United States. Apparently, a number of diaspora group leaders have long-standing links to Beijing. Those ties include ties to the United Front Work Department, which is an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. An investigation based on an analysis of more than 2,000 photos and videos from Students for a Free Tibet, the Hong Kong Democracy Council, the China Democracy Party, Observer Social Media, and live streams, demonstrates that the Chinese government was actively intervening in the United States. While there was aggression from both sides, according to the Washington Post, the most extreme violence was instigated by pro-China activists and carried out by coordinated groups of young men embedded among them. Anti-Xi protesters were attacked with extended flagpoles and chemical spray, punched, kicked, had fistfuls of sand thrown in their face. The Chinese consulate in LA paid for supporters' hotels and meals as an incentive to participate. At least 35 pro-Chinese Communist Party diaspora groups showed up to the summit protests. Videos show at least 4 Chinese diplomats from the consulates in LA and San Francisco among the crowd of pro-CCC protesters. Chinese diplomats hired at least 60 private security guards to protect Chinese diaspora groups gathered to welcome Xi. So in other words, the Chinese government had forces on the ground in the middle of all of this to beat up people who are on the other side. None of this should be a shock. It turns out that fairly frequently, left-wing groups are infiltrated by enemies of the United States, which reminds us that class is back in session at places like Columbia. America's colleges are opening once again, and Iran-backed student groups that hate Israel and hate the United States are on the move once more. In fact, video has now emerged from the National Students for Justice in Palestine. They're active at Columbia. It is literally the first day of classes, and they are already going on about how evil America is and how it's time to divest from America. There's pictures of them having defaced, put paint on statues at Columbia. Doing a wonderful job. The National SJP over at Columbia University, already defacing the statues. They put out a statement, quote, "Divestment is not an incrementalist goal. True divestment necessitates nothing short of the total collapse of the university structure and American empire itself. It is not possible for imperial spoils to remain so heavily concentrated in the metropole and its high cultural repositories without the continuous suppression of all populations that resist the empire's expansion. To divest from this is to undermine and eradicate America as we know it," which is what they want. They want complete collapse of the entirety of the United States. They want to undermine and eradicate America as we know it. Undoubtedly, many of these groups are tied to the funding of Iran. And yet, a Western society that has left itself wide open to its manipulation by the Chinese Communist Party, by the Iranian government, by actual enemies of the United States, well, that has happened because it turns out that a morally relativist belief in the non-superiority of American values leads to an open mind so open that all your brains fall out. It's not just in the United States, by the way. It is also in Europe, which is why you are seeing a massive populist backlash in Europe. That is being driven by high levels of immigration from the radical Muslim world. But it's not only about that. According to the Wall Street Journal, anti-establishment populism is on the rise in Europe, fueled not just by migration and economic and security fears, but by a deeper trend, eroding confidence in government's ability to overcome those challenges. In Germany on Sunday, the far-right AfD and a new far-left populist party obtained almost half the votes cast in the eastern state of Thuringia, and together also took more than 40% in neighboring Saxony. In Thuringia, the AfD finished first, the first time a far-right movement has won a state election in post-war Germany. And of course, in France, the far-right National Rally has been picking up significant seat in the legislative elections. Immigration, inflation, the war in Ukraine, populists are, because of all of these things, notching electoral wins in Italy, in the Netherlands, in Sweden, in Finland. These crises are arising because of a failure of trust in the systems, and those systems have failed, which is why there's a failure of trust. Now, there's always a problem with the failure of trust, which is how far does it go? It turns out that conservatism is generally not about tearing down institutions. Right? It just sort of cuts against the conservative grain. Typically, conservatives are the ones who are attempting to maintain the institutions. But when the left takes over institutions and perverts them, conservatives are left with a very difficult choice. Do you attempt to regain those institutions and rebuild them from the inside, or do you try to tear them down? And if you attempt to tear them down, how far can you go tearing down institutions before you look more like a revolutionary leftist? It's one of the reasons why you're seeing this sort of bizarre populist horseshoe theory thing happening with the far right and the far left. It's why you'll see descriptions of American foreign policy from Howard Zinn and from people who are paleo-conservative in the United States that look very much the same. And the answer is, once you are now in the business of believing that all of America's institutions are so corrupt they have to be torn down, it's just a question of what comes after the tearing down. Okay, now, that doesn't mean that this hasn't been well earned. Okay, the populist uprising that's happening in Europe has, in fact, been quite well earned. It has to be done with caution. You would hope that the parties that take over have a shred of responsibility. With that said, it is very clear why this is happening, and that is a philosophy that says the West is not in any way innately superior to any other culture on the planet, that the West, in fact, is exploitative and evil, and that it needs to open its doors wide to people who hate its guts so that it can be exploited from the inside. That is the only way to dissociate from sins of the evil past. And unsurprisingly, what that means is that the actual citizens of the West suffer, and then they rise up in populist movements. Again, what we are watching right now is a populist uprising all over Europe. It would be surprising if it didn't happen in the United States as well. There are concrete reasons why governments may feel less effective today. In France, Italy, and the UK, high public debt is restricting government's policy choices. Remember, the moral relativism of the left is usually tied to two other promises: massive welfare state redistributionism and sexual libertinism. Those are the two big promises. Well, it turns out massive welfare state redistributionism stagnates the economy, which makes people feel even worse. And sexual libertinism destroys family structures, which provide the solid basis for any functioning society. Again, only exacerbating the problems that these folks were put in power supposedly to alleviate. So, not a shock that you're seeing a populist revolution pretty much anywhere. Also not a shock that you are seeing that amidst a leadership failure that allows for the complete honeycombing of Western societies by sympathizers with enemies of the West. Okay, meanwhile, the situation in the Middle East continues to percolate. Hamas is threatening to kill more hostages. Of course they are, because this is what they do. They're one of the world's most evil terror groups. That, of course, is not a shock. And meanwhile, the United States continues to keep pressure on Israel. There is, again, not a shock. Joe Biden, trying to speak through his face hole again, didn't go amazingly well. He was asked whether he's going to speak with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after attempting to lay blame on Netanyahu for the singular sin of Israeli hostages being murdered. Here was Joe Biden being a terrible person.
Do you have any plans to speak to Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Eventually.
What do you mean, eventually? Eventually, aren't you the president of the United States? Shouldn't you speak, perhaps, to the prime minister of the country where hostages were taken, one of them an American, and then they were shot point blank in the back of the head? Might you speak to that ally? Or no? You're too busy sleeping it off in Rehoboth Beach and being brain dead. It's not just Republicans criticizing Biden over this, by the way. Democratic Representative Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey, he says it's pretty obvious that Joe Biden is putting pressure on Netanyahu.
President Biden making it clear today that he does not think that the Israeli prime minister is doing enough to get to a ceasefire. If the U.S. wants a different outcome, to get to a pause in the fighting that will eventually become a permanent ceasefire, what pressure would you like to see from the Biden administration?
Well, I think the fact that they're speaking out is a lot of pressure. I also think the president also said that Hamas needs to be held accountable, right? I mean, I think there has to be pressure on all parties to get a deal done.
Okay. Why is there pressure on all parties to get a deal done? Israel has accepted a wide variety of deals. It is Hamas that has rejected every deal, and hostages in the back of the head. Like, what the hell are these people talking about? It's insane. But we are now at the final offer. Okay, if you believe that, I have another bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. Apparently, according to the Jerusalem Post, Israel is braced to receive a non-negotiable Gaza hostage deal on the table from mediating countries Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. So I have a question. Why are Qatar and Egypt on the non-negotiable Gaza deal? Why? Qatar is a front group for Hamas and Iran. Like, they share oil fields with Iran. It is the reason why they have such friendly relations with Iran. It's why Ismail Haniyeh housed himself in Qatar before he was killed in Iran. Why is Egypt pretending to be a party to the negotiations? Egypt was facilitating the building of the terror tunnels across the Philadelphia corridor. Those were terror tunnels that went into northern Egypt. What, like, are they the honest broker here? Qatar and Egypt, and then Joe Biden's United States? I think what will happen in the end is there will be a kind of take it or leave it deal, which U.S. President Joe Biden would put forward, together with the Egyptians and the Qataris, according to Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee Chairman Yuli Edelstein. Then we will have to take a decision, and it won't be negotiable again, he said. Apparently, this will supposedly now include terms less favorable to Israel even. Well, Israel could always just say no. Or presumably Israel could say yes. And so long as the proposal is not a full-scale surrender to Hamas, Hamas will then reject it. And then don't worry, Joe Biden will come back and put more pressure on Israel, because that is what Joe Biden does. Because, of course, Joe Biden is a terrible president who doesn't know anything and is morally imbecilic as well as actually intellectually imbecilic. Alrighty, folks, coming up, new information on the Covenant School shooter. In a second, we're going to get to the manifesto, which has finally been released. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.
Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
Growing up, I never thought much about race. It never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me. Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey. If I'm going to sort this out, I need to go deeper undercover.
They gon' say I'm racist. Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Here's my certification. And what you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. This is more for you in this field. Is America inherently racist?
The word inherent is challenging there.
I want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument.
America is racist to its bones.
So inherently.
Yeah, this country is a piece of
white
folks,
white
trash,
White supremacy.
white woman, white boy.
Is there a black person around here? What's a black person right here? Does he not exist? Hi, Robin.
Hi, what's your name?
I'm Matt.
I just had to ask who you are because you have to be careful.
Never be too careful.
Buy your tickets now. In theaters September 13th. Rated PG-13.